The Subtle Art of Not Giving a by Mark Manson. There are questions that keep recurring in our mind. What do I want out of life? What is my purpose in life? When people are asked that question, the most common answer is achieving happiness. Things like having a family, becoming rich, getting a job or a degree, becoming physically fit, traveling to see different parts of the world are just examples of that. In reality, these answers mean absolutely nothing. It is impossible to achieve all those goals simultaneously for the simple reason that the time and effort required to do so is unrealistic. That is why most of us never achieve anything, and that leads to a life full of misery. So what do we do about that? There is another question that is worth paying attention to. A question that makes us reflect and think. What is the amount of pain you want in your life? And what are you willing to fight and struggle for? For life, in a sense, is a type of suffering. The rich suffer from being rich, the poor suffer from being poor, the person without a family suffers for not having a family, another person suffers from having a family, and so on and so forth. When we reflect on that question, then and only then do we know exactly what we want from life. And that's where the art of indifference comes into play. It becomes easier to accept that the world is a terrible place, and that is fine, because the world has always been that way, and will probably stay that way forever. To understand the art of indifference, you must consider 3 points. Number 1, not over-caring doesn't mean that you don't care at all. It just means that you care enough at a level that's just comfortable for you. Number 2, for you not to be bothered by challenges, you must only care about the things that mean something to you. The thing that you can point to whenever you answer the pain and struggle question. And so you minimize caring about everything else. Number 3, whether you realize it or not, you will always make the choice that means something to you. Point to remember, life is full of different kinds of suffering. You must decide the type of suffering that is worth fighting for. In the year 1983, a band had just signed an agreement for recording its first album. 2 days before starting the recordings, their guitarist, Dave Mustaine, was fired from the band. Dave was woken up and given a ticket for a bus ride home. While he was sitting on the bus heading towards Los Angeles, he felt upset and anxious after the incident, especially considering how hard it is to get a recording contract and that he might have missed the chance of a lifetime. After a while, he got through it and decided on founding his own band that would be better than the first band and make his former bandmates regret their decision. Revenge was never far away from his mind. He actually pulled it off, and after 2 years of struggling, the band managed to record its first album, which made it to the golden charts. That band was none other than the legendary Megadeth, that went on to sell over 25 million copies of its recordings and managed to perform in locations all across the globe. Unfortunately, the band that Dave was kicked out of was Metallica, a band considered to be one of the greatest rock bands in history. Metallica sold over 180 million copies. In an interview with Dave, he stated that he considered himself to be a failure despite all his achievements, just because he couldn't beat the previous band. This story is a good example of the importance of deciding the correct values and standards when we measure our successes or failures. Dave was measuring his success based on beating his previous band, thus condemning himself to an eternal failure. It became clear to us that there are good and bad standards. Good values and standards are rooted in socially constructive, able to be measured and controlled. Truth, honesty, defending yourselves and others are examples of good values. And the opposite is also true. Bad values are fictional, socially destructive, and cannot be measured or controlled. Examples of bad values are domination through force, seeking to please everyone, becoming rich just for the sake of it, and caring about being the center of attention always. Point to remember, to change how you look at your problems, you must change what's important, and change the values that you use to measure your success or failure. William James suffered from several health problems from birth that were a continuous threat to his life. As a child, he caught a disease that made him temporarily blind. It was normal for him to feel intense abdominal pain that made him throw up continuously. He also had multiple problems in hearing and back cramps that make it unbearable for him to sit or stand. All these issues forced William to spend most of his time at home drawing, all alone and not with many friends. When he became an adult, no one wanted to buy his drawings. He came from a wealthy family and his father was one of the most prominent businessmen in the US. And so his father used his connections to enroll William into Harvard Medical School. But poor William was never comfortable in his new surroundings. whereas constant medical problems were a constant obstacle to his studies. However, he didn't quit school, but decided instead to go on an archaeological expedition to the Amazon forest, where his failures continued due to his weak physical condition. He came back to the USA, where he became extremely depressed and began to plan to end his life. But one day, William was reading lectures written by the philosopher Charles Peirce. The main point in Charles's philosophy was that a human being is 100% responsible for everything that happens in their lives, irrespective of who is to blame. William decided to embrace that philosophy, and today, William James is considered to be the father of US psychology philosophy. His works have been translated to dozens of foreign languages. He also became a professor at Harvard and traveled the world to give his lectures. In fact, the phrase reborn again has been accredited to the ideas of William. The essence of the story is that as humans we must realize and believe that we are responsible for everything that happens to us, irrespective of surrounding conditions. We know for a fact that we are not capable of controlling what happens to us or what will happen to us. We are only capable of controlling how we interpret what happens to us and control how we react to those situations. Point to remember: accept responsibility for everything that happens in your life, regardless of who is to blame. Death is a fact that no one can deny, for the fate of all living things is to die. Most people find it hard to accept, even though it has such a profound effect on how we live our lives and the decisions that we take. In The Denial of Death, a book by Ernest Becker, which was one of the greatest intellectual and philosophical works of the 20th century, the author states that he wrote that book on his deathbed after he was diagnosed with colon cancer. The book contains two essential ideas. First, human beings are unique creatures that are different from other living creatures because of their ability to envision, imagine, and think. A person can envision themselves in hypothetical scenarios in the past, present, and future. This leads to the realization of certain death at a moment's notice. A human being is born with a fear of death, which is an existential worry that governs all that he thinks and does. The second idea of the book is that the realization that we will all die one day makes us think and act on leaving a mark and making an impact that will outlive our mortal bodies, which Ernest Becker named the Immortality Project. That is why many famous persons throughout history have tried to implement that idea by putting their names on buildings, statues, paintings of themselves, or writing a book. It is safe to say that human civilization is nothing more than the result of all these immortality projects that man and woman lived through before our time. For they built cities, governments, authorities, politics, sports, art, and technology. But there is a dark side to the Immortality Project, because on a large enough scale, it could lead to the breakout of war, revolutions, mass murder, like what happened in World War I and II. Even on an individual scale, the failure of achieving immortality could lead to anxiety and depression. Fortunately, there is a way to beat this idea. Simply, learn to use the art of indifference, where you can focus on the present and the next moment after that. Point to remember: get rid of the idea of immortality, for death is inevitable. Thanks for watching. Please follow our social media accounts. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, comment below and share your thoughts on our book summary for this week.